Now that we know the supply curve, it is time to shock the economy. What will happen next? As before, it's important to note which shocks will move us along the curve versus shift the whole curve. Anytime we mess with the economy, we model it one piece at a time, holding everything else constant. Ceteris paribus, all else held constant while something changes. And of course, once we have all the little pieces, we can put them all together and do some very sophisticated things. First and foremost, when the price changes, quantity supply is going to change. That will be represented by a movement along the curve, thus reflecting the law of supply. Price goes up, quantity supply goes up. When the price of housing goes up, for example, we'll move along the supply curve. More and more builders will have an incentive to enter the market, thus resulting in an increased quantity supply. Of course, not all suppliers respond to prices in the same way. Unfortunately, in the past few decades, housing construction has not been as price sensitive as it used to be. Increased zoning restrictions prevent suppliers from constructing what the market would want. And so even when there's a price increase, the way the market is set up, suppliers won't increase the quantity supply as much as they would without the zoning. We can also see this discussed in the context of Uber. If their supply curve is relatively responsive, an increase in the price will result in a large increase in supply. Think about this in the context of surge pricing. They've come under a lot of criticism over the years for raising the price drastically during times of peak demand, such as right after a sporting event, or more controversially, during an emergency. But if, and that's the important part here, if Uber drivers are very responsive to increases in prices, a higher price will result in more drivers entering the market and thus more rideshare services. But of course, if that is not the case, if higher prices are not bringing more drivers onto the market, that higher price is not helping consumers very much. Whether or not the market is characterized by very responsive Uber drivers or not much change in quantity supply is the key question in this debate. But if we have another type of shock, something else besides a price, it will need to shift the curve. The whole relationship will change for each price and quantity supply pair. This is a shock happening outside the axis and thus will move the curve itself. To help us organize this, think about what suppliers care about. Firms care about profits. So anything that will affect profits will affect their willingness to sell. We got a whole list of them here. Changes in input prices, improved technology and cost efficiency, the prices of outside options, related goods. They care about expectations about the future, and of course, how many sellers are in the market. For example, if the price of wood fell, which is an input price to housing, we would see greater supply across the market. So for the same price of a house, construction companies will bring a greater quantity supply. Not all shocks in the economy will affect supply and demand equally. When you go out to buy a baseball cap, you don't look up the price of cotton. However, a producer of baseball caps very much cares about the price of cotton. Changes in the market for raw cotton will shift the supply curve for baseball caps. We have lots of different inputs. Labor inputs, which are paid by wages, are generally the largest, followed by capital rents, such as paying for land or machines. Intermediate goods, that would be the cotton in the hats, or onions in the kitchen. And finally, energy prices, such as electricity or other fuel. Labor is categorized as the human input into the production function. As wages rise, costs increase, and the supply curve will shift to the left. Keep very much in mind that we were holding everything else constant at this point. Remember that higher wages will mean higher income, which will in turn lead to higher demand, and this higher demand can eventually turn around to increase business activity. Over the past few decades, the price of most energy has continued to fall. On the vertical axis, we have price per megawatt hour of electricity, and on the horizontal axis, we have quantity of electricity generation. What these really neat lines tell us are improvements in technology. For instance, offshore wind saw a very positive supply shock over the past decade, which means more electricity is produced at a cheaper price. Most dramatically, of course, has been solar power. The positive supply shock in technology is extraordinary, going from $378 a megawatt all the way down to $68 a megawatt in 2019. As expected, coal has not really seen an increase in technology, nuclear unfortunately has become more expensive, and onshore wind is showing bright news. But that decline in cost is even more dramatic if we look further back. The price of lithium-ion batteries fell by 97%. In the early 90s, a price per kilowatt was over $7,500, and now it's less than $200. Like, this isn't trivial. When we talk about electrification, when we talk about renewable energy resources, long-run technical improvements are the whole story. Let's talk about related goods. So, you're a sugarcane farmer. A price of a substitute changes. In this case, a substitute in production would be either to produce sugar for the table and consumption, or to refine it and create sugar ethanol, which is used for fuel. If the price of ethanol increased, the supply of kitchen sugar would decrease at every price point. On the other side, price of complements in productions matter. If the price of beef is higher, we'll see a higher supply of leather across the market. Now, I think the difficult part of mastering this is gaining that intuition, thinking about it from the perspective of the firm. What is a substitute in production and what is a complement in production? Which is not going to be the same thing as from the consumer perspective. You can't drink sugar ethanol. It's not good for you. And your car can't take table sugar either. So pause and think about a few other items that you can serve in a burger restaurant and ask, is this item a complement in production or is it a substitute in production? A lot of the food on the menu would be a substitute. You can spend your kitchen equipment cooking a hamburger, or you can spend your kitchen equipment cooking French fries or a pizza. But a restaurant could also be a live music venue or a community gathering place. Next, a quick note, just like consumers, producers care about expectations. Take the oil market. Back at the beginning of the pandemic, oil producers all believed the price would fall for a long time. They thought we would have a severe recession that might last years. And so immediately, they changed their behavior by slowing down production. This change in beliefs affected behavior today, whether or not their predictions of the future were accurate. And in hindsight, it's pretty clear they pulled back production too much because the economy recovered from the pandemic very quickly. And thus there wasn't enough supply to meet the market's demand a year later. And finally, the more sellers that are in the market, the more individual supplies will stack up, thus increasing the total supply. And I can't emphasize this enough, this is why economists want as much competition and as many new entrants as the market will bear. As we wrap up this chapter, take a moment to think about how suppliers and demanders are different. Demanders want low prices, suppliers want high prices. Suppliers care about input costs and the efficiency and technology that they can produce things. Consumers have tastes and preferences, whatever makes them happy. In the next chapter, we're going to put supply and demand together, thus completing our model of an entire market.